Welcome to Charts Today. My name's David Linton, and today's edition for Thursday, the 25th of July, comes to you from London. And as always, we start by looking at the dollar index. Just been a bit flat over the last day, but still holding on to its bullish position here. So dollar bullishness, the long-term theme still holds true, and the medium and short-term trends coming back into line with that. Looking at the euro, we see the euro weaker. Remembering this is my long-term, my medium-term, and my short-term view. So the euro is weak on all three time frames. We've got these downside targets of about 1.3 to 2.5% lower hanging over us. There's one here of 6% and another one of 14%. So dollar strength is really the key, and we're seeing a little bit of a decoupling there where dollar is sort of pushing ahead and the euro is weaker. The yen, the dollar yen, dollar is looking strong there, except on the long and short term, medium term charts. The short term is looking bullish, and that's because the yen is seen as an even safer haven, really, than the US dollar. Sterling is down this morning. A lot of political news to digest in the UK, of course. The likelihood of a no-deal Brexit is increasing, and that's not popular within the sterling chart. But we're seeing here we do still have these long-term targets that have been in place for a very long time hanging over us. So it's not something that's new. Looking at sterling against the euro, we're sitting at 112. We're actually a little bit stronger here. And against the Swiss franc, we're sitting at 123. Sterling just improving there a little bit as well. Bitcoin is back above the $10,000 level, so that's quite key. We're sitting at 10,066 this morning, and this should be an interesting level to see whether we can actually just get through this 10,000 and maintain it. We've got the short-term chart is still bearish, but looking like it will make a transition, so it'll be interesting to watch. We don't really have any significant downside targets on Bitcoin. We have upside targets that would need to be activated with new highs. The US stock market was up 0.5% last night on the S&P, just continuing to push ahead. We've got 50% upside for the S&P. That's such a hard target to believe, but that's what the market's saying. On the short-term chart and the 60-minute chart, we've got three targets. 1% higher, 1.4%, and nearly 2%. So that does just tell us that we've got some legs yet on the short term as well. The Nasdaq is looking bullish as well, and the Dow actually did the reverse yesterday. The biggest caps just actually fell back a little bit. The Russell 2000 index actually rose quite strongly yesterday. So we're seeing a little bit of resurgence in the smaller caps, which is why the Dow was down, but the S&P and the Russell were up. The futures this morning very flat on the S&P future. The Nasdaq future down about 1/3%. So probably the market is going to open flat based on what we can see at the moment in the US. The UK market is up just under 1/3% this morning, so it's looking a little bit better. Still affected here by politics, of course, and we are just seeing the uncertainty of that widening pattern. So it's a bit hard to say which direction the UK market's going to go in, but of course we've got quite good looking US charts which will probably have an effect. Midcap 250 index looking quite good on the short term, good on the medium term, still has work to do to break through on the long term, but we are again seeing quite a strong steady performance over the last few days on midcaps. The DAX in Germany up just over 0.25%, and the CAC Quarante outperforming again, up 2/3%. The and nudging a new all-time high. The Japanese market is actually flat this morning, and the Hang Seng was up 0.25%. China up 0.5%, not enough to take these markets bullish. The Sensex in India still underperforming this week and in short-term bearish mode, and medium-term the chart is just looking a little bit less good. The long-term trend is still very much in train. We've got great upside targets. Looking at the Aussie market, we're up 0.6% there as well, looking pretty strong. Brent crude just holding around the 63.50 level. We are short-term bullish, but the medium and long-term chart's still bearish. Waiting really news flow from on crude to move the prices there, and we're seeing the S&P 500 index, the WTI up 0.6%. Gold is looking stronger again this morning at 14.25, not quite enough to take it bullish, and silver actually sitting at 1650. So looking like we will break into long-term bullish on silver. US 10-year yields sitting at 2.02%, fell quite heavily yesterday, back to test this 2% level. So we are just seeing here downside pressure on yields, and so consequently we're bearish still on all three time frames. That the bearish trend on the medium and long term charts really dominates, and that's when we see the short term chart coming back to that. If we look at stocks, first of all, and this data coming from Yahoo Finance, we take a look at the best performers yesterday. Intel were up 2.2%, Visa, Goldman Sachs, Microsoft. Microsoft actually has had an amazing year, outperforming the market by 18% against the Dow. So just continuing to run up the hill very sharply. Caterpillar and Boeing, the underperformers. Caterpillar was down 4.5%. That chart really starting to look quite bearish, and Boeing also just looking more bearish as well. Of course, the news there on the 737 affecting things. Looking at Texas Instruments in the Nasdaq, they were the best performer, up 7%. Microchip, that was also up 4.5% in sympathy. So we are seeing some pretty big performance there. AMD, Analog Devices were also up. So we are seeing quite strong performance in chip makers yesterday in the US. Checkpoint Software were down 2%. So not a lot of, and we saw Google down 0.2%. Not a lot of movement there, despite the news the Department of Justice will investigate. Looking at the Aussie market, Seven West Media, Channel 7, up quite sharply, but the chart looking pretty poor here. We're underperforming still by about 30% this year. The best performer in Oz, the worst performer in Oz was Ilklov Resources, down 7%. That really having an effect on that chart there as well. Looking at the Nifty 50 in India, Lupin Limited were the best performer, up 4.6%. And on the downside, and there we see the live price coming from Yahoo Barchard Finance, they were down 4.5%. Taking a look now at Europe, and we'll start by looking at the UK top 100. AstraZeneca up 5.8%, and on the downside we've got Sage down 9%, really big fall there. That trend, that might be the beginning of this trend coming to an end. It's had a very good recovery trend, but we're seeing here now that's really just ticked them down quite dramatically this morning. On the 250 side of things, we had Aston Martin yesterday were down massively. They're down another 8% this morning. And if we look at Metro Bank, down 16%, and again, no good news coming out there. They've underperformed the Dow Jones Index by 75% this year. So Metro Bank looking quite seriously in trouble there. Aston Martin, as we said, down 8%. Sports Direct down 4.6%. Their share's not looking great either. And on the upside, we've got Cobham Group announcing a takeover this morning, private equity takeover. That's pushed them right up. And Howden Joinery up 5%. Taking a look at the Euro Stocks 50, the top stocks in Europe. Nokia, they're up 6% this morning. Not enough quite to take them into bullish territory there, but looking better. Schneider Electric in Paris, they're up 3.7%. That chart looking pretty strong. And if we look at the downside, we've got Telefonica in Italy, they're down 1.5%. That chart not looking great. And BMW still falling lower there as well. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. See you then.